80s nostalgia has been going strong for years. The new season of Stranger Things has returned Kate Bush to the top of the charts, and a Top Gun movie smashed the box office. Thor: Love and Thunder is also joining the fray with their own bout of nostalgia. In this video, we'll take a look at the nostalgia in Thor: Love and Thunder. Stay tuned. Firstly, Thor: Love and Thunder welcomes you to the jungle. One of the reasons why Thor Ragnarok was so exciting is that Taika Waititi brought a fresh and exciting feel to the movie. With its sci-fi hijinks on an alien world and the comedic duo of Thor and the Hulk, Ragnarok felt very different from the other movies that were coming out from Marvel. By all means, Love and Thunder doesn't feel like any other Marvel movie either, but that's actually because it feels like a good chunk of other geek media coming out these days. The movie's trailers featured the iconic Sweet Child of Mine, both the original 80s rocker and an orchestral epic version. The logo is also very metal, which seems appropriate since Thor is revered in the metal world. Vibrant colors and colorful characters are everywhere in this movie, while Gore the God Butcher stands in contrast to them. And that's just the trailer. Get into the movie itself, and at its heart is a cheesy love story, easy humor, and big bold action. The soundtrack is full of hits from the 80s and epic covers of hits, including 3 Guns N' Roses songs. There's more to the movie as well, including roles of other pantheons of gods in the Marvel universe and the ethical dilemma that Gore poses. But the movie is rather too flighty to be bothered much by all that. Taika Waititi promised us a superpowered rom-com, and that's basically what you get. When you look at Thor's new and more colorful suit, you can totally see a time in the 80s when Arnold Schwarzenegger could have worn it. He might have been pursuing Sigourney Weaver. Maybe Jean-Claude Van Damme would play Gore. All they'd be missing is the Disney budget, but Thor: Love and Thunder seems exactly like the kind of movie that'd be playing in the cinemas in the 80s. It's not a huge problem, but this nostalgia cycle has been too long. The theory of the nostalgia cycle has been around for decades. As kids grow into their 20s and 30s, they take up jobs writing and creating content for Hollywood. These kids are naturally going to be nostalgic for the era in which they grew up, so you suddenly start to see a lot of movies and shows that are nostalgic for the time of 20-odd years ago. In the 70s, writers were nostalgic for the 50s, which gave us classics like American Graffiti, Grease, and Stand By Me. And cycles like this have repeated through the decades, but many people have observed that the nostalgia cycles have been getting longer. Thanks to Stephen King's best-selling novels, 50s nostalgia was alive even in the 1980s, but it sure feels like the current 80s nostalgia cycle has been the longest one yet. We first started to see 80s nostalgia in the 2000s, but the trend really kicked into gear in the early 2010s with movies like Drive and Super 8. And not only has it kept on going, but it's been getting stronger. Stranger Things is just one example of a recent show set in the 80s. The Black Phone, King Richard, and a good chunk of Elvis are all recent movies that have the familiar sepia tones and pastel colors of the 80s. It's not that we're getting annoyed that there's no nostalgia for the 90s and 2000s yet, but 80s nostalgia is getting a bit stale. The aesthetic is tired and overdone, and we have to imagine that audiences are losing interest in this decade. Of course, Thor will make tons of movies, and Stranger Things will get high ratings, but those are major franchises in their own right. We wonder if 80s alone is enough to get people to watch movies and shows anymore. All this nostalgia stuff aside, is Thor: Love and Thunder even good? If you liked Thor Ragnarok, and many MCU fans loved it, there's no way you could dislike Love and Thunder. The spirit that gave us Ragnarok is alive and well in this newest Thor movie. But while Ragnarok had some serious stakes underneath its silliness and irreverence, Love and Thunder struggles a bit to make you feel that this movie is worth your time. That sounds weird to say when Gore the freaking God Butcher is the villain, but the truth is that Gore isn't in the movie as much as you'd expect. While the movie does a good job of effectively revisiting Jane Foster's character and her relationship with Thor, this just isn't a very impactful movie. Not every MCU movie has to be a game changer or permanently alter the course of the MCU. We've gotten a lot of that kind of content this year already, but we do wish that the movie wasn't so flighty. It barely feels like a meaningful chapter in the story of Thor Odinson, let alone anything else. All that being said, it's still a fun movie and well worth the watch if you're a Thor fan. On the other hand, if you're not that big on Thor, or you're starting to come down with MCU fatigue, this is one of the easiest movies to skip. Next, in other news, there's a lot of stuff on the cutting room floor of Thor: Love and Thunder. The newest Thor movie is out, and everyone's excited about what's in the movie. But as more behind-the-scenes details trickle out, some fans are also excited about what's not in the movie. In movies, an assembly cut is the version of the movie that has every single piece of shot footage strung together in chronological order. Assembly cuts are usually long, but Love and Thunder's was reportedly almost 5 hours long, and yet the finished product is under 2 hours of runtime. What scenes got left out? Well, Christian Bale isn't too happy about how much of his work is missing from the final cut. As we mentioned before, Gore is barely in the movie, and Bale is stung by the fact that so much of his effort has gone to waste. Also on the cutting room floor are scenes featuring Alyssa Milano, Lena Headey, Peter Dinklage, and Jeff Goldblum. The latter two have roles associated with Thor already, but the former two were playing new characters that we won't get to see, unless there's a Taika cut. No, don't get too excited about a Taika cut. Ever since the Snyder Cut crowd got what they wanted, fans are often quick to demand similar cuts for other superhero movies, and with all this buzz around content content cut from Love and Thunder, the inevitable has happened. Hashtag release the Waititi cut is trending. Unfortunately for the Taika cut crowd, Taika's already shot the idea down. Speaking to Variety, the director said that he thought director's cuts sucked. They're too long in his opinion, and they feature a lot of stuff that was originally cut for a reason. Talking about a hypothetical Waititi cut, he said that his director's cut would have a few extra jokes on there at best, but he restated that there's a reason he cut those scenes in the first place. So hashtag release the Waititi cut trend is gonna be pretty short-lived. Finally, if you thought Gore was spooky, you're not the only one. Did you find Gore the God Butcher scary? Well, he isn't just a terror to gods, but he's a terror to little kids too. Natalie Portman told Total Film that whenever Bale would get into makeup and character as Gore, he'd send the children on set running and screaming. Even the adults were unnerved by him, and understandably. Portman notes that it was weird to have a normal conversation with Bale when he'd be in makeup looking like a monster. In fact, Bale himself must have been daunted by his look in the movie because of how much time he'd have to spend doing makeup and prosthetics for it. When he signed on to the role, he assumed that he'd don a motion capture suit, which is traditional for a character design like this. To his horror, he was told that he'd have to show up at 2 a.m. to begin his 4-hour makeup routine for this role. Now, Bale is definitely experienced with body transformations, but this might have been too much even for him. We'd say that the results speak for themselves. Christian Bale is one of the most gifted actors in the business, and he got a look that went with his talent. He's such a consummate professional that he wouldn't even mind such a difficult makeup regimen. All this makes it a real shame that so much of Bale was eventually cut from the movie. We can relate to his frustration in that regard. If only we'd gotten to see more of this effort in action. That's all for today's video. Have you seen Thor: Love and Thunder? Did you enjoy it? And how did you feel about the ongoing wave of 80s nostalgia that isn't slowing down? Finally, which of the upcoming MCU projects are you most excited for? And which ones from the past year have been your favorite? Let us know in the comment section below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.